From Hollywood, it's Out of My Mind. I'm Jay Douglas. And in Episode 7, our search for the essential, non-essential, and curiously essential information we baby boomers need to know takes us from the inner reaches of the atmosphere to the outer reaches of the galaxy, by way of 1 million social media followers and your golden years. Now, if you're not a baby boomer, but you're curious to know what your parents and I talk about every week, you're invited to listen too. All you have to do is memorize the words to Teddy Bear's Picnic and be able to recite them after you and your friends have had a few too many beers. It's all part of a misspent youth flashback as Episode 7 of Out of My Mind begins with email from a listener. Mark Twain once said, "Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it." That's probably why Jeff of Eagle Rock, California wrote to us, rather than to Mr. Twain, with a weather question, because he wanted somebody to do something about it. Jeff asked why the local television stations, the local newspaper, and his favorite weather app all have different predictions for the same day's weather. I called Stuart Seto. He's a specialist with the National Weather Service in Oxnard, California, about 60 miles up the coast from Los Angeles. And it's where he and his colleagues forecast the weather for most of Southern California.
Sometimes the weather just changes.
And there you go, Jeff. Thanks for asking. Okay, I know you were expecting a little more than that.
There's different forecasters, even on the weather broadcasting channels, on the news channels. And then there's the National Weather Service, and there's several private companies like AccuWeather and those. And sometimes the meteorologists there will kind of see things a little differently, and so they'll put their own twist into the forecast.
Weather is far from an exact science. An individual forecaster can look at the atmospheric maps and forecasts created by a computer model and make a totally different call than a colleague in the next room. Oh, about that computer model.
There's about 4 or 5 models. And they even have one chart that they call a spaghetti chart that tries to align these models together, showing what each one is representing.
We have different forecasters looking at different models. And if the forecasters don't always agree, the models aren't much better.
Usually the timing is what's different between the models. But even sometimes the different models will indicate different weather patterns.
But the models don't have to agree. For example, if one model forecasts temperatures that are consistently low, a forecaster can adjust for that as long as the model behaves that way month after month.
When the seasons change, some models work better, especially like springtime or just before in the fall. There's a lot of change going on. So sometimes a lot of the models will react differently to that.
So, Jeff, there's your answer. Different forecasters looking at different models that make different predictions at different times of the year. But Stuart has another explanation, one that I'm surprised Mark Twain didn't give when he talked about the weather.
It's got its own mind, and all the weatherman has to do is kind of catch up to it.
Stuart Seto is a specialist with the National Weather Service office in Oxnard, California. While I may have taken a little poetic license with the forecasting process, Stuart says the National Weather Service's accuracy in its 3-day forecasts is now over 90%. And with some new technologies coming in the future, they'll do even better. You always wanted to write a book. And you would have if life hadn't gotten in the way. So you put that book on hold, waiting until you retired. Then one day, with a gold watch in your pocket, you find yourself with the time to work on that dream.
I wrote a novel when I was in grade school.
That's author Nick Iuppa talking about his 7th grade experience with writing. It was more than an experience. It was the start of an addiction.
Where could you be more creative? Where could you have more control than if you wrote novels? You can envision anything you want. You can say anything you want. You can build characters you want. So from then on, I was going to write novels.
Nick was fortunate to have a career that allowed him to write stories, educational scripts. His name is on 2 textbooks. But he never wrote a novel. When Nick retired, he made up for lost time. He wrote 3. None of them sold. That's when Nick's life took the kind of turn you read about in novels. He was about to submit yet another book to the usual round of publishers when
I asked a friend of mine to read it, and his wife was an expert in e-publishing. And she said, why do you want to send this to publishers? I mean, you haven't had any success. Why not e-publish it?
That conversation saved Nick from giving up on his dream.
All the books that I have published, which are the Alicia's Ghost trilogy and a prequel called Avenging Adelita and Bloody Bess, are all books that I've e-published myself.
What Nick discovered is that the digital revolution, where writers can bypass publishers and get their books directly to potential readers, is putting authors in charge of their dreams. Now it's a question of whether you're serious about making an investment of time and energy. Nick has some thoughts about gauging whether or not you're prepared.
Well, I think the first one is, what's your goal? Because a lot of people these days have a goal to just write a novel. I mean, I've got my bucket list. Number one on the bucket list is I'm going to write a novel. Okay, so and publish it could be the second goal. That's a fairly obtainable, modest goal as long as you've got the persistence to write, to actually finish it. If you want to take a step up the ladder and say, I'm going to write a really good novel, then you have to master the craft or to some degree, and you have to get really good at it. Now, if you're like me and your goal is to write a successful bestseller, you have to ask yourself, how much are you willing to do? Because the third element is the hardest of all, and that is marketing. You write the book, you get it e-published, and then you have to figure out how to sell it. And you have to get in there and follow the steps to successfully market your book.
Nick has made the investment, and now it's paying off. The books publishers turned down are selling and bringing him not only a little money, but something he finds even more valuable.
At the end of Alicia's Ghost, there's a form that you can fill out and send in to us if you like the book. And, those reviews are the most spectacular in the world. I haven't gotten a lot of them, but I've gotten some, and by God, they will carry you for days. Here's somebody I didn't even know, somebody I didn't even ask to read my book. Somehow they bought it, somehow they liked it, and they thought enough of it to tell me about it. They're not friends. I didn't give them the book. I didn't pay them anything. And yet here is this incredibly positive series of statements about my work. That's what you write for, is that kind of feedback.
Nick Iuppa is an author living in Northern California. He has more to say about the joys of writing and handling negative reviews. You can listen to his comments in the show notes. Go to bit.ly/OOMM123. Click on episode 7 and follow the link to show notes. I've also included links to Nick's Carlos Mann trilogy website and to his books. If you read them and enjoy them, I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing that from you. And now, meet Monica Church. She's in her early 20s, and she's one of a growing group of young entrepreneurs who make their living posting videos to YouTube.
I make money by just ads being placed on the side, just on a page right next to my video, and then also from sponsors.
Where we might have dreams of writing a book, our kids and grandkids share Monica's dream. She has over 600,000 followers on YouTube. It's an audience companies can't reach through traditional advertising. They turn to people like Monica, and therein lies the opportunity for the right kind of person.
I think there's two types of YouTubers. There's the kind that just upload now and again and just kind of show their friends, and they think that if they just put up a video, it's just going to randomly get a million views. And then there's the other YouTubers that take it seriously and they want it to be a career. And if you want it to be like that, you want to make a living off of it, you do have to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. And you have to always be thinking of new ideas. And you constantly have to be on your social media and connecting with your followers and thinking of new ideas and filming the videos and putting them up on time and editing them and making sure that they're different and original and listening to feedback. It's like an all-consuming 24/7, all I'm thinking about is YouTube.
If your child or grandchild is in the second category, Monica has some suggestions for how to grow a young YouTuber. Since viewers come to expect a YouTuber to concentrate on a narrow topic, you can start by helping your child or grandchild find an area of focus.
Have a really clear topic, whether it's beauty or comedy or science or pranks, and stick to that.
Even if it's one of those awkward conversations and you thought you were done after the birds and the bees, you can also point your child or grandchild in the right direction by acting as their critic without being critical.
I would want to hear from my parents ways to make it better. If they had that, I would be totally open to listening to that. I like hearing other people's ideas, but I would say don't be critical of what a person did because they're the artist making the video.
Monica Church is a successful YouTuber with nearly 1 million followers on social media. She limits her focus on YouTube to beauty and lifestyle tips. You might want to give your child or grandchild a link to Monica's YouTube channel so they can see what it takes to succeed. I've put that link in the show notes. Despite the spectacular pictures sent back from Pluto by the New Horizons spacecraft, there remains the question of whether the money spent on probing Pluto, or any other part of the universe, is worth it, given the other pressing needs of society. To find out, I climbed up the hills overlooking Griffith Park in the northeast corner of Los Angeles and spent some time with the director of the Griffith Observatory, Dr. Ed Krupp. My intention was to discover whether the observation of Pluto was worth the money. But our conversation ranged far beyond Pluto, both geographically and metaphorically.
We went to Pluto to find out what we're going to find out. And we've been fortunate to be the first people in the history of the planet to have seen every one of these worlds of our solar system close up, the major worlds. And I was fretting back in the days of the Voyager spacecraft. We were going all the way out there to Neptune, but Pluto wasn't going to be included, back when Pluto was still a planet. And I thought, this is not right. I want a complete set. Look, this is stuff way in the outskirts of the solar system. It has something to do with the origin of the solar system. And the origin of the solar system has a lot to do with our origins. So if we want to know who we are and where we come from, understanding the early days of the solar system, the sun and these worlds that whirl around it, is key. And Pluto is one of those absolutely necessary pieces of evidence.
Dr. Krupp says asking what good will come from space exploration is unanswerable, at least at the moment.
Everything that we do in the nature of exploration is an investment in the future. And you don't know when you're in the middle of it what the spillover is going to be a century or two later. But let's just go back 400 years. Galileo sees that there is a different kind of cosmos out there, that it is concrete in its detail. They were just lights in the sky before. Before the telescope, you'd see worlds like Jupiter and Mars, and they were like stars that just happened to move differently. When Galileo sees that these are really worlds in space, and he pays attention to the idea that, well, they're moving in a way that our methods for predicting where they ought to be at any given time is not all that right. And he collects that information. He promotes the alternative notions to how to calculate this stuff from the old system that had been inherited from the ancient Greeks as early as, in this case, the 2nd century A.D., and endorses the work of Nicholas Copernicus in Poland, who puts the sun at the center of the solar system and these worlds going around it. That in itself, you might say, is no big deal, but then Kepler comes along and he takes that vision and he says, wait a minute, there's more information here. They're not just going around in circles, they're going around in ellipses. These are like ovals that are the ways that the worlds travel around the sun. You say, well, what's with that? Why is that the case? And he says, you know, there's a central force operating. This leads to Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton defines that central force as gravity. Not only does he define it, he explains it mathematically so you can start making predictions, not just about what these worlds in the sky are doing, but what things on Earth are doing. And everything that we do is related to being able to predict the behavior of objects, whether it's electrically or chemically or physically. But that, in fact, is what science is all about.
It may seem hard to balance, going to Pluto now versus putting that money to other uses. But it's the same present versus future decision we're faced with when we choose to invest in our children's college education or start a retirement plan. What's more, space exploration and personal investment share a common motivation:
It does require belief in the future. In fact, you don't get a future if you don't believe there is one. And you have to have the notion that this is a small price to pay for the continuity of the human experience on this planet. All of the things, for example, that are preoccupying us as practical matters now, whether it's the climate, the environment, the circumstances, and all that. How is it we even know about that stuff or able to deal with it? The picture that we had of our Earth in our imaginations, not just science, but the way we thought about it, changed dramatically when we went into space, went to the moon, took a picture of the Earth back from the moon and saw it as this blue sphere alone in the cosmos. Astronomy prompts the big questions, and the big questions inspire curiosity. And that curiosity then leads to more accurate representations of nature. More accurate representations of nature aren't just something that we do for fun. They're tools for survival. Our ancestors sought more accurate descriptions of nature to figure out how to get the crops not to freeze or to get everything done in the season of growing. I mean, this is an old story for us. They watched the salmon runs in order to know when that resource was going to be available or not. That was science in its way. Just as our ancestors invested in knowledge on which we depend, we have a responsibility to invest for our descendants.
But is there enough interest in science to keep this investment going? This is not 1961, when President Kennedy galvanized the country with his plan to put a man on the moon. Kids today may need a nudge in the direction of science. Dr. Krupp will be back in episode 8 with ways you can light that flame of scientific curiosity in your child or grandchild. It's time to take our heads out of the stars and deal with the reality that this wraps up another episode of Out of My Mind. I'm glad you were able to spend a part of your day with me. I always enjoy it. There'll be a new show for you Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern, so we can talk again next week. In the meantime, please help us grow the audience for the show by telling your friends about Out of My Mind, by liking us on Facebook, and by leaving a great review on iTunes. You can find out more by going to bit.ly/OOMM123 and clicking on episode 7. You'll also find ways to stay in touch with the show by sending us your comments and questions. I'm Jay Douglas. Out of My Mind is produced by Penny Summers and is a production of the Theater of Your Mind Incorporated, Hollywood, California.